Before being invited to this symposium, I'd never paid much attention to my Irish origins. One ancestor was Mayor of Dublin when John Foley was a child. Other family connections in England were with the sculptor John Bell, and these interested me enough to write a book about him, a process that introduced me to Victorian sculpture in general. Bell was a contemporary of Foley's and a direct competitor too, finally carving the corner group of America at the Albert Memorial. That's the one with the bison, which was highly regarded, though not as much as Foley's Asia. My next contact with Foley was in India, where I went in 2011 to research my part in a book, and we've just heard the title. My co-author was Marianne Steggles, who had been Canadian academic, who had been to India a few times and had done the real pioneering work. The book was prefaced by Ben Reed, who, I think it's true to say, inspired all sculpture historians of our era, and who pointed out how his students could hardly comprehend the scale or quantity of British works in Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. Marianne listed numerous factors to consider, the most interesting of which, for me, is her text titled Choosing a Sculptor. Why did they choose Foley? I would suggest that when memorial committees in India met during the 1850 to 1873 period, a busy time because it included a great uprising or mutiny, they or their agents in London would want to turn to the best sculptor available. In previous decades, this had been Francis Chantry, who, like Foley, had a full order book for years ahead. In the case of Outram, we'll come to that, John Foley had already made a marble bust of him before the famous bronze horse and rider was commissioned. The same was true regarding Harding, as Foley had made a marble bust of the Governor-General 4 years before the equestrian work. I'm discussing all 10, well actually it's 9.5, works in India, starting with when he was 21 and leading through till his death at the age of 56. So, is it press the green button? Right. Okay. This is the 1839 memorial to Catherine Prendergast in St. Mary's Church in Madras. Catherine Jane Prendergast, 1811 to 1839, died of a tropical disease at a relatively young age, the fate of many a bride arriving in India. In fact, Catherine was not a first-timer. She had lived in Madras as the daughter of Dr. James Annesley of the East India Company Medical Service. Stark, yet elegant, her memorial was a bas-relief illustration of a funeral urn with a swathe of cloth, a shroud perhaps, covering it in an arrangement of folds on either side. In creamy white marble and set against the 17th century interior of St. Mary's, it is a poetic still life. Without any doubt, the commission, which was, I think, Foley's first, because he's still a student at the RA schools, came through Dublin contacts. The sculptor was 21 when he first exhibited at the RA in the same year as the young woman's death. Later, in 1845, Foley carved a marble bust of Catherine Prendergast, which is here in Dublin at the National Gallery. So, a rather strange picture. Right, I'll explain. 1858, Major General William Nairn Forbes in a bust. The original was in marble in the Asiatic Society in Calcutta. William Nairn Forbes, 1796 to 1855, came from near Aberdeen, was one of several Scottish engineers to make a mark in India. Attached to the Bengal engineers in about 1822, he impressed his superiors as a capable character and was entrusted with the design and building of some of Calcutta's most stylish edifices. best known of which was Calcutta's third mint, known as the Old Silver Mint, and St. Paul's Cathedral in Calcutta, that is. On completion of the mint, he was assigned mint master, supervising the productions of hundreds of thousands of coins every day, each of which was marked with an F for Forbes. Like so many before him, Forbes felt his health declining, and in 1855 tried to return to Scotland. This really happens all the time, but expired on the long sea journey. The East India Company commissioned a marble bust from John Foley, who was at that time engaged in completing the equestrian Lord Harding. The marble bust was, of course, sited at the Mint and disappeared long ago when the coin factory shifted to a new site. It featured a balding but well-featured man with a benign expression and a bare torso who glances to his left. The Asiatic Society received the sculptor Foley's original plaster cast, which was paraffin waxed and painted black. This was provided by Foley himself, though there is a detectable oddness about the engineer-architect's torso, added by someone else, because it seems, well, you can't see all of it actually, but what's underneath that, it's done by someone else, and it's just, I think, really to make it a larger thing for a stand. So we move on to the 1858 memorial to Sir Henry Lawrence in St. Paul's Cathedral in Calcutta. Brigadier General Sir Henry Montgomery Lawrence, 1806 to 1857, was one of the most conscientious administrators in British India. From a family of Ulstermen, he signed up at the age of 17 and was attached to the Bengal Army Artillery. Hard campaigning left him fever-ridden, and he was shipped home in 1826. Returning 3 years later, he worked as Surveyor of Revenue until his recall to military duty at the outset of the ill-conceived First Anglo-Afghan War. Taking a diplomat's role, his next post was in Lahore after the Anglo-Sikh War, first as political agent and later as resident. Up in hill country and far from administrative centres, Lawrence gained a reputation for fairness to one and all. He established 3 schools for sons of soldiers, which survive today as public schools. In 1857, with the Great Uprising or Mutiny fully underway, Lawrence was present at the Siege of Lucknow and was fatally wounded. Coming at the time of hundreds of memorials and graves resulting from the Great Uprising of 1857, the order was given to Foley, and it was for a dignified and relatively plain memorial to be placed on a wall inside a cathedral. The exact date of the arrival of the memorial to Lawrence, a relatively small work, is unknown. A clue is in the sculptor's name, inscribed in the marble, J.H. Foley, R.A., and he did not become a full R.A. until 1858. The memorial features 2 small polished granite pillars reaching to a pointed Gothic frame, within which is an inscription and a bas-relief cameo of Henry Lawrence's head in profile. He's shown with a wispy beard and a lean face, the carving derived from a painting. The carving is exceptionally fine. I don't know if you can see up there, but it's a very graceful image. Right. As you know, this is the Harding. So 1862, Sir Henry Harding, electroform bronze, shipped from Calcutta to UK around about, beg your pardon, shipped from Calcutta back to the UK in about 1962 and in a private garden in England. Henry Harding, 1785 to 1856, first Baron Harding of Lahore and King's Newton, began his stratospheric career by joining the army at the age of 13 It's quite young, isn't it? He became one of Wellington's officers in the Peninsular Wars and was injured on the eve of Waterloo, which caused his arm to be amputated at the wrist. Under Wellington, he entered politics and became secretary at war, and later, at the Duke's behest, took over as Governor-General of India. So he's the top man. Within a year, he was at war with the extremely powerful army of the Sikh kingdom of the Punjab, centred on Lahore. Harding was fated as a victorious hero and was raised to the peerage. Back in English politics, he was employed in ordnance and later blamed for the army's lack of preparation for war in Crimea. After Wellington's death in 1854, the old soldier retired to his home near Penshurst in Kent and died 2 years later. When Harding had left India, he brought home his Persian Arab stallion, Miani, and a tiger which had eaten 13 people as a gift to the Queen. The horse had belonged to the previous governor and was named after the 1843 Battle of Miani. Harding, riding the same horse, had been sketched on another battlefield by his secretary and son, Charles Harding. This was adapted by Francis Grant for his 1849 oil painting, The Viscount Harding, Governor-General of India, accompanied by his two sons and Colonel Wood, on the battlefield of Firozeshah. Miani is a grey, and his foreleg is raised in the painting, though not to the high-stepping degree of the sculpture, nor is he champing at the bit. The waving tail, characteristic of the Arab horse, is not so evident either. On Harding's death, a public subscription was raised to pay for a statue, and a commission went to John Foley, who had already made a bust of it, which is in Maidstone Museum in Kent. Adapting the scene of the painting, Foley titled his equestrian statue Viscount Harding on his war charger. The Harding established Foley's reputation as a master sculptor, very capable of the difficult task of modelling a horse. The art journal later described the sculpture as a masterpiece of art, though in truth its making also took a great deal of science. It was the first large equestrian statue in history not to be conventionally cast, but electroformed, building up layers of metal for the separate pieces which were adjoined by electroplating. The method used by Elkingtons of Birmingham was connected to Faraday's experiments with electromagnetism in the 1830s and first used for smaller objects, gifts and items like that, toys. It made the sculpture much less heavy and was cheaper than conventional cast bronze. Incidentally, mentioning Faraday, Foley had made 3 portrait sculptures of Faraday. This information comes from my visit to the sculpture, to the statue, and observation at very close hand, facilitated by there being no base or plinth. The alloy in the sculpture's upper parts were only about 1/4 of an inch in thickness, and the strength to support its own weight came from an internal framework. Once the statue was assembled and dressed with extras such as reins, stirrups, and Harding's sword, it was exhibited outside the Royal Academy, again at the International Exhibition, 1862, before shipment to Calcutta, where it was placed on a 20-foot high pedestal outside Government House. It stood for nearly 100 years, a towering 19-foot tall statue. So that's 19 foot on top of a 20-foot plinth. You really are looking up at this, or once upon a time. So the pawing stallion with the Governor-General with his flowing cloak, medals and decorations. In about 1962, news reached England that the Bengal authorities wished to clear Calcutta's main streets of sculptures from the colonial era. Baroness Helen Harding of Penshurst declared an interest to buy the statue from the government of India at a price of about £35. And Lord Inchcape offered to bring it home in one of his ships at no cost. A picture in the Daily Mail featured the statue lashed to the bows of a ship arriving in Tilbury. But the most hair-raising part of the journey was to follow. As the lorry carrying the statue entered the Dartford Tunnel beneath the Thames, it was quickly noticed that there was only 2 inches of fag's paper clearance between the bronze rider's head and the roof of the tunnel. It arrived at Harding's old home at South Park in Penzance and remained there until 1985, at which point the house was sold and the statue moved to the home of a family member in Cambridge. Despite being a private possession, it is an English Heritage Grade 2 listed monument. I've got another picture as well. So the design came from the paintings, but I can't stress the size of this. You know, when I went to see this, I stood on the lawn and I was standing, I'm not tall, I'm not short, but my head came to about just below his knee. So it is larger than life-size horse. So it's interesting that, as we'll see, although in the 1960s, the West Bengal government, not the Indian government, the West Bengal government, which was stated that it was a communist government, was shipping out all the equestrian monuments, and they're all lined up out at the governor's summer house or summer garden, about 8 miles north of Calcutta. And it's really quite astonishing to be there, to see a line of equestrian sculptures where you can compare Goscombe John to George Frampton. They're all literally next to each other. But despite what Ronan said, actually Foley's equestrian sculptures, or 2 that are entirely by him, missed that journey out to Barrackpore, and Harding went back to England. And we'll see that the other piece stayed, but stayed in public. Right, this is Lord John Elphinstone. It's in the Asiatic Society Library, which is joined on to the Town Hall in Bombay. I don't know if you can see it there, but you can certainly see it on these side screens. That there's a beautiful sort of golden pallor to the sculpture. It really shows the shape, every fold, and that lovely effect is dust. You can't beat it. If that was cleaned up, it wouldn't be quite so interesting. The Asiatic Library at the time was being cleared. They were having a clear out. It had 6 million books. Somewhere they've even got one of 6 copies of Dante's Inferno, but it's pretty chaotic in there as well. But the sculptures are at the top of one staircase, and they're quite serene, and they give a very good atmosphere. Well, one that I liked. So he was his dates: birth 1807, death 1860. He was the governor of Bombay in the 1850s. This man's not to be confused with either his uncle, Mount Stuart Elphinstone, honoured with a statue downstairs in the same building, or Major General William Elphinstone, a relative and an inept leader during the famous retreat from Kabul in the First Anglo-Afghan War. How Lord John arrived in India derived from his first appointment as a young guardsman to be a lord-in-waiting to the old king, William IV. He was at the court when the king's successor, Princess Victoria, became queen. The young queen's minder and mentor, Lord Melbourne, perceived the beginnings of love between Elphinstone and Victoria and arranged for him to be posted far away. He was appointed governor in Madras, still only 30 years old. 5 years later, Elphinstone resigned and did something most unusual, electing to go on a private exploration in northern India, notably in Kashmir, which we've just seen some pictures of. Back in London, he was again appointed to be a lord-in-waiting, this time to the married queen. After this, Elphinstone was sent to India again, this time to govern the presidency of Bombay. He remained there during the uprising and was said to have maintained order in Bombay by extinguishing conspiracies and rebellions before they began. Lord John returned to Britain in 1859 and died unmarried in the following year. Foley had modelled him in the clothes he would have worn on the day he was created Baron. The subject stands confidently with his hand on his hip, looking directly ahead. Interesting, there are 3 other figures in the Town Hall Asiatic Society in Bombay. All of them have the same position, same pose, I mean. I guess if they didn't have that pose, it would just be sort of shapeless if the cloak just enfolded him. Now, we're going on to this figure. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a problem. This is the 1865 Nasawanji Manakji Petit at Kumbula Hill in Bombay. Nasawanji Manakji Petit, 1827-1891, was a prominent Parsi whose good works did not go unnoticed. Incidentally, I must explain, I would be here all week if I was trying to talk about who the Parsis were. They're Zoroastrians. They've come from, basically, from Persia to Western India. And they got on very well with the newcomers, the British, and they now form there's only about 10,000 of them, but they are very, very wealthy. I mean, Mr. Tata, who died last month, is a good example. The Petit nickname was given to his family, who were not tall, by French seamen. His statue's inscription states it was erected by friends and admirers as a tribute to the memory of their distinguished and philanthropic citizen, Nasawanji Manakji Petit, Esquire, JP, in appreciation of his excellent virtues and extensive charities. Amongst Parsis, this philanthropism is extremely important. That's how they distinguish themselves. The subject leans on his elbow on a tall pedestal covered with books and a fringed shawl. His other hand holds a book with his finger holding a page at the ready. Looking at the marble figure, the first thing one notices is the quality of the carving, yet it portrays the subject as a fairly senior citizen. In fact, he was only 38 and had another quarter century of life ahead of him. There are a couple of unusual aspects relating to the base and plinth of the statue. Firstly, it's inscribed on the east face with the name of its maker and supplier, Paolo Triscornia of Carrara, home of the finest marble. Secondly, the west face bears a delightful architectural sketch in low relief showing a street scene in Bombay with trees and large buildings with screens and arches. In preparation for the 2024 J.H. Foley Symposium in Dublin, I was referred to the standing plaster figure inside the Royal Dublin Society, and when I saw it, I became confused. And that is still the case. Quite simply, they are not the same figure. In fact, they may not be the same subject. I wonder if the title of the RDS figure could be wrong, and that the figure is that of another Parsi gentleman, perhaps Sir Kawasji Jahangir, rudely named Mr. Ready Money. By the way, his nickname, Mr. Ready Money, was most of the statues in India are subscribed by wealthy Indians. Very convenient. And I think the British had given him a rather impertinent nickname, calling him Mr. Ready Money. But anyhow, who we'll see in a minute, whose statue was made by Thomas Woolner, an ally of Foley, and erected outside the University of Mumbai in I've done it myself, Mumbai, in 1876. All these speculations are coloured by Foley's death date and the fact that his pupil, Thomas Brock, made a few more statues of Parsis in the city. Another factor was that Bombay was in a state of frenzy to erect various buildings and statues, including the figure of Jahangir, which closely resembles the Dublin figure. Let's go, sorry. It closely resembles the Dublin figure named as Nasuanji Manachi, in time for the Prince of Wales, future King Edward VII, visit in 1875. Now, I hope I haven't caused problems, and I think actually that it may have been a situation as Foley's studio was closing that they had to name these things, and they could see it was a Parsi, and so they opted for that name. I hope I haven't caused a problem, but they're obviously not the same figure, are they? They just aren't the same figure. So, the next thing we're looking at is a memorial to William Ritchie in St Paul's Cathedral in Calcutta. William Ritchie, 1817 to 1862, was a barrister who arrived in Calcutta in 1842 and steadily rose in his profession until he was Bengal's Advocate General, the most senior lawyer in India, and the legal advisor to the Viceroy's governing council. Ritchie's mother was William Makepeace Thackeray's aunt. He was characterized by old-fashioned politeness and, according to the inscription, sweet and generous temper, which is most unusual in the profession. William Ritchie did not live to a great age, and most of his children died in infancy. I have recollections, a surviving son later wrote in The Riches of India, that's the title of his book, of a house with a small portico, the great deep veranda upstairs, darkened by Venetians, with a great deal of greenery, of entertainments, and of the coming and going of men of the Anglo-Indian type that I've known so well since, well set up, genial, busy, practical, and of my father riding his big horse. After Ritchie died, his fellow citizens raised a subscription and through an agent contacted John Foley. Ritchie's memorial is an assemblage. It comprises, firstly, a bust showing Ritchie's broad whiskered head protruding from endless folds of cloth, which, as usual, lend a classical air to the subject. Beneath the bust is a Gothic pedestal with an inscription, and on either side and facing outwards, two statues of women in Roman dress. These signify Justice, who carries a book, and Truth, who holds a scroll over her heart. The inscription records that it is a memorial of the affection of friends and fellow citizens. So it was definitely publicly subscribed. This is Outram. Even if 1861, Lieutenant General Sir James Outram, marble bust, Victoria Memorial Hall. The Victoria Memorial Hall is it's like a huge white stone and marble, vast building with domes and statues and so on. And you might think it was Curzon's vanity, but before he left India, he put up this hall, and he put it up on the Maidan, which is sort of the common, really. And he took up a large area of this. So at the time when all the statues were being moved out, a lot of them went up to the Victoria Memorial Hall. At the time when I went there, if you went into the Victoria Memorial Hall with a camera, which, of course, I had a camera, if you attempted to get it out, and take a photo, you'd be stopped by armed policemen. I'm not joking, it's changed now. Anyhow, that's just to tell you where Victoria Memorial is. Even if Sir James never saw the magnificent equestrian sculpture that Foley was making, he did see the marble bust. It was exhibited at the RA in 1861, prior to shipment to Calcutta, where it was placed in the town hall. Outram had been there a year earlier at his 14th of July farewell meeting with civic dignitaries and friends, who formed a memorial committee. Outram had asked them not to spend too much on the larger work that Foley planned. They did spend a lot. There were a number of busts at the town hall, and these were taken with others from all over Calcutta to the Victoria Memorial Hall in the 1920s. This is what I've just been mentioning. The last of them in the 1960s. The Outram bust shows the old soldier's head slightly inclined to his right, the gaze fixed. His moustache and small goatee beard, his eyebrows and even his receding but flowing hair are all skillfully carved. It is a strong face, perhaps a tired one. Foley must have modelled this in London in the autumn of 1860. We move straight on to the equestrian shop. This is a shockingly focused internet picture of the inauguration on the Maidan of the Outram equestrian, which is 1874. And I think it's probably one of the most magnificent sculptures in India. And I'm not sure what everyone else thinks, but I think it's a very, very important work in looking at Foley. It's in the memory of James Outram, who, as I've mentioned earlier, joined the Bombay Army at the age of 16 and served for 40 years. He was noticed for his bravery, which earned him the respect of all ranks, serving in Afghanistan, Sindh, that's sort of southern Pakistan now, and Persia. Outram is best known for the relief of besieged Lucknow during the Indian uprising. Afterwards, his troops called for him to receive the newly created Victoria Cross, but he would not accept, allowing instead the conferral of a baronetcy back in England, where he returned in 1860. Honoured with a public statue in London by Matthew Noble and the portrait bust we've just seen by Foley in Calcutta, the old soldier may have seen a reduced plaster version of Foley's equestrian statue at the Royal Academy in 1861, but neither he nor the sculptor were to see this outstanding work when it was completed. It was installed opposite Park Street on the Maidan and unveiled on the 24th of May 1874. Foley was thought to be the best equine sculptor of the Victorian era, and the sculptor himself considered this complex equestrian study to be his best. I've been able to say that because there's no J.E. Boehm fans here to say, what about him? Looking at the work, still supported. Now that's, we'll move on. This is, I told you all the works moved out in the 1960s. All the others were going to be put on lorries and carted a long way. This statue moved only, I should think, 500 yards, and it's now in the extensive grounds of the Victoria Memorial, which is not too far that way. Don't worry about the safety equipment that the workmen are using. Unlike the Harding equestrian group, which was electroplated, Outram and his horse were conventionally cast by Robert Masefield and Co. of Chelsea in 1873. In truth, the statue is more akin to the all-action school of equestrian sculpture, favoured in many countries, USA, but not really comparable to the conventional British equestrian sculpture, which invariably depicts the horse at rest. Looking at the work as it is now, it's still supported by its original Cornish granite plinth. The subject is a well-built man in command of an Arab stallion. The hero is turning around in the saddle. There may be meaning to that. I'm not going to discuss that. Pulling up his horse, which is wide-eyed and ears flattened, straining to come to a halt. Originally, the bronze rider carried a sword in his hand, which we saw just now. That's now missing. The statue's in good condition, though the stirrups are missing, and the small holes just about on his right-hand boot, there's a small hole where the stirrups were attached, and now there's a steady column of ants entering and exiting the warm metal horse. They're safe from all sorts of predators, and I can't imagine what it's like inside, hot and busy. Foley's equestrian Outram was much admired and copied by Indian sculptors more than once. That's the back. We must, I'm glad I've got this. Because everybody always looks at the other side with his face, but this side's got a lot going for it. As I mentioned, it was admired by Indian sculptors and with a lot of emphasis. And this is, what it is up there. He's got the tail, and yeah, the Outram in India, and this has been pointed out by Indian art historians, is a very interesting one, because if they had rejected all the colonial sculpture, for all the reasons that they might, they accepted that there was an amazing amount of art here, and that this wasn't something to be just thrown away. As a last, before I move on to the next thing, I personally wonder how Foley was able to model this, because Edward Muybridge's photographs, you know, the ones that have got the horse in motion, where artists could actually know that, for example, when a horse was running, it was floating, all 4 feet were off the ground, so it didn't know till Muybridge's pictures. Well, those Muybridge's pictures hadn't happened. How the heck, photography was there, but how the heck did Foley find this subject? We know that the Irish are top of a tree when it comes to horses, and I think it hasn't been said. Foley really shows that with this. Anyhow, one more look at that before you go. Right. Now, I said that it was 9.5 sculptures we were looking at. This is 1874 Viceroy Earl Canning. It's at the hospital grounds in the police lines at Barrackpore at Calcutta. Started by Foley, completed by his pupil. The equestrian statue of the first Viceroy of India was erected by the southwest corner of Government House. After removal in 1969, the monument was taken out to the old military cantonment in Barrackpore, where it was placed on a brick plinth overlooking Lady Canning's grave. All agree that this new location denoted a high degree of sensitivity to the memory of the bereft Viceroy. There's a lot been written about Canning and his sadness after Charlotte Canning died of malaria. In terms of the difficult matter of equine realism, whoops, am I over time? Well, I'll just tie this up now. Sorry. It's a successful bit of equine realism, seeming to capture a moment where Canning has loosed the reins and the alert stallion stands still. Back in London, Foley, famously worn out from carving his immense sculptural cornerpiece of Asia for the Albert Memorial, expired with a number of commissions unfinished. These, including Lord Canning and his horse, were followed through to completion by his pupil, the sculptor Thomas Brock. The names of both sculptors were inscribed on the original base. Notes from the expert and biographer of Brock, Dr. John Sankey, citing the Times of 13th November 1877, explained that Foley had only made an 18-inch tall model of Canning on horseback. Everything from there onwards, all the modelling in clay, supervision of casting, shipping and design of the original plinth were undertaken by Brock. Here was proof that Foley's gifted pupil was up to the mark for important work to come, including more of the master's original commissions. And most of those are in India are figures of Parsis. Well, anyhow, that's 9.5 pieces in India.